My sister and her husband recently moved back into our parents' house with their kids. Not long after settling in, they started expecting me to babysit whenever they wanted time to relax. One day, they flat out assumed I'd watch their kids so they could unwind, but I told them no. That's when things blew up. They were furious that I wouldn't step in and help, acting like I owed them free childcare just because we're family. Instead of seeing my side, my parents backed them up and said I should be more supportive. It felt like everyone expected me to drop my own life to make things easier for them. After realizing I wasn't going to get any support or respect in that house, I made a decision. I moved out. And since I had been helping cover some of their bills, I stopped paying those too. If they believed I should just do whatever they wanted, then they could figure things out on their own. The first thing I remember from that night wasn't the taste of the meatloaf, but the sudden, violent silence that followed the word apartment. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air right before a massive thunderstorm breaks, where you can practically hear your own heartbeat thumping against your ribs. I was 22, a fresh business degree clutched in my hand like a shield, and I had just made the mistake of thinking my life belonged to me. I remember looking at my mother, seeing the way her grip tightened on her fork until her knuckles turned a ghostly white. My father didn't look up. He just stared at his plate as if the answers to our mounting debts were hidden in the gravy. I had landed the job at Davidson Marketing, a real job, with a cubicle and a 401k and bonuses that felt like a fortune to a girl who'd spent 4 years living on ramen. I had it all mapped out, 3 months of saving, a modest deposit, and then a place with a view of something other than my childhood swing set. Moving out. My mother's voice didn't crack, but it had a jagged edge to it that made me flinch. She sat her fork down with a precision that felt clinical. "Anna, you know I can only work part-time at the library." My back, it's been flaring up again. I felt the familiar tug of guilt, a hook she'd been burying in my skin since I was a toddler. Beside her, my father cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding together. "Things aren't great at the plant, Anna. There have been rumors of layoffs since the merger. We've been counting on you. We could really use your help with the bills. And you wouldn't have to pay rent here," Mom added, her voice softening into that sweet, manipulative honey she used when she wanted to swallow you whole. "It just makes more sense, doesn't it? Family stays together." I looked down at my half-eaten dinner, the meatloaf suddenly tasting like ash. I felt the walls of the kitchen, the same pale yellow walls that had witnessed every one of my sister Sarah's triumphs, closing in on me. I wanted to scream that I had worked 3 jobs to get through school without a loan, that I had earned this freedom. But then I looked at my father's tired eyes and my mother's performative wince as she adjusted her posture, and I caved. I always caved. "I guess I could stay a little longer," I whispered. The routine that followed was a slow-motion drowning. Every 2 weeks, my paycheck would hit my account, and within 24 hours, most of it was gone. I wasn't just paying for my share. I was paying the electric, the water, the groceries, and the mysterious, miscellaneous expenses that kept appearing on the kitchen counter. I was the silent engine keeping the house running, working 45 hours a week only to come home and find a list of chores waiting for me. But the true shift happened when the golden child returned. My sister Sarah was 7 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, she walked on water. When she showed up last weekend with her husband Mike and their 2 kids, Emma and Lucas, the energy in the house shifted instantly. It was like a movie set where the stars had finally arrived, and I was just the overworked grip holding the boom mic. "Oh, my precious angels," my mother cooed, her back problems miraculously vanishing as she scooped up 4-year-old Emma. My father, who complained about his knees every morning, swung Lucas onto his shoulders with a roar of laughter. Sarah stood in the foyer, looking like a catalog advertisement for motherhood, perfectly coiffed hair, a designer diaper bag, and that effortless air of someone who has never been told no in her entire life. My parents hung on her every word. They wanted to know about her garden, the new organic bakery she'd found, the hilarious thing Lucas had said at preschool. They looked at her with a raw, unfiltered pride that I had never managed to trigger, not even when I graduated magna cum laude. "Anna, be a dear and put on some coffee," Mom called over her shoulder, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. She didn't ask, she commanded. I was the background noise in Sarah's symphony. Standing in that kitchen, listening to the chime of their collective laughter, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I remembered being 11 years old, standing at this same counter with a report card full of A's, vibrating with the need for a well done. Mom had barely glanced at it, her mind already miles away on Sarah's college applications. "That's nice, Anna," she'd said, waving me away like a persistent fly. "Sarah, honey, tell me more about the Brighton campus tours." The disparity was a living thing in our house. When Sarah got into Brighton, a prestigious private university, my parents didn't hesitate. They took out loans they couldn't afford, drained their meager savings, and toasted to her brilliance. I remember the night they sat me down, just a week after she left. "Anna," Dad had said, his face grave, "we need to tighten our belts. Sarah's education is an investment in our family's future. We're going to have to make some sacrifices." The sacrifices were almost exclusively mine. I kept a cracked flip phone until the buttons literally fell off. My clothes came from the fill-a-bag days at the local thrift store. Christmas became a somber affair of new socks and notebooks, while Sarah received care packages filled with gourmet snacks and extra spending money because she shouldn't have to stress while studying. I learned early that if I wanted a future, I had to build it out of iron. I joined every club, took every AP class, and stayed up until 3 a.m. writing scholarship essays until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. I did it so I wouldn't have to ask them for a dime. And when I got the full ride to state, the look on their faces wasn't pride, it was relief. Relief that they wouldn't have to spend a cent on the other daughter. Now, years later, the cycle was repeating, but with higher stakes. Sarah and Mike's visits were a whirlwind of entitlement. Within an hour of arriving, Sarah would always find a way to corner me. "Anna, you'll watch the kids while Mike and I go to the mall, right? We haven't had a date afternoon in months." The first few times, I tried to deflect. "Why can't Mom and Dad do it? They've been dying to see the kids." "Oh, honey," Mom would chime in, appearing like a specter of guilt. "You know my back can't handle the toddlers for that long. And your father worked so hard this week. Be a good sister." So I would sit there, watching Frozen for the 100th time, the lyrics to Let It Go feeling like a cruel irony, while Lucas tried to use my professional marketing journals as a coloring book. I was the free labor, the convenient solution, the invisible support beam. But then, the floor fell out from under Sarah's perfect life. I was finishing the dinner dishes alone, as usual, when I heard the phone ring. My mother's voice went from curious to horrified in seconds. "Sarah? Sweetheart, don't cry. What happened?" Through the thin kitchen door, I heard the frantic, sobbing explanation. Mike's company had folded. No severance. No savings. Their landlord was already threatening eviction. It was a classic golden child crisis, big on drama, short on personal responsibility. "Of course you can come home," Mom cried out, her voice filled with a terrifying sort of joy. "We'll make room. We'll make it work." My heart hit the floor. I walked into the living room, drying my hands on a towel. "Mom, if they're moving in, we really need to talk. I think this is the sign I should finally find that apartment." You'd have thought I had suggested we sell the family dog to a laboratory. My mother looked at me with genuine disgust. "Anna, don't be ridiculous. Your sister is in crisis. This is family. We stick together." "Family sticks together," my father echoed, his voice final. The following weekend was a nightmare of cardboard boxes and chaos. Sarah, Mike, and the kids arrived with 3 cars packed to the roof. My parents didn't even ask me. They informed me. I was being moved. My bedroom, the one with the good light and the built-in desk I used for my late-night work, was being turned into a nursery for Emma and Lucas. "The children need space to play, Anna," Sarah said, not even looking at me as she directed Mike to haul a crib into my sanctuary. I was relegated to the storage room off the laundry area. It was a windowless box, barely large enough for a twin bed and my dresser. It smelled of mothballs and damp concrete. Meanwhile, the house became a war zone. The silence I needed to decompress after a high-pressure day at the office was replaced by the constant, rhythmic thumping of feet and the high-pitched shrieks of 2 toddlers who had no boundaries. "Emma, Lucas, please, I'm on a conference call." I'd plead, trying to shut my door as they burst in for the 5th time that hour. "They're just playing, Anna," Sarah would drawl from the sofa, her feet up, scrolling through her phone. "God, don't be such a grouch. They've been through a lot of change." The boiling point came with the arrival of the first utility bill. I opened the envelope in the kitchen and felt the blood drain from my face. Between the extra laundry, the constant dishwasher runs, and Sarah leaving every light in the house on, the bill had nearly tripled. "We need to talk about the expenses," I said that evening at dinner, my voice shaking slightly. I laid the bill on the table. "I can't cover this alone. My entire paycheck is going into this house, and I'm not even the one using most of the water and power." The clatter of Sarah's fork was like a gunshot. "Are you seriously doing this right now? Mike is unemployed, we've lost our home, and you're over here counting pennies." "I'm not counting pennies, Sarah, I'm losing my savings." "Anna, enough," my father barked. "Your sister is going through the hardest time of her life. Family helps family. This isn't the time to be selfish." "Selfish?" I whispered, looking around the table. "I'm the only one paying for anything." "Sarah is right," Mom added, her eyes cold. "It's disappointing to see you so focused on money when your sister is suffering. We expected more from you." I went in my windowless room that night and cried for the first time in years. Not because I was sad, but because I realized I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a utility. I was a resource to be harvested until there was nothing left. A week later, Mike found a job. It wasn't the executive position he thought he deserved, but it was a paycheck. I thought, finally, some relief. I was wrong. "It's just so exhausting being with them all day," Sarah began to moan the moment Mike started his new 8 to 6. "I never get a moment to myself." The favors started small. A quick eye on the kids while she showered. A 10-minute stint while she ran to the store. But within 2 weeks, it had morphed into a full-blown second job. I would walk through the front door after a 10-hour day at Davidson, and Sarah would be standing there, purse in hand, keys jingling. "Oh, thank God you're home," she'd say, already halfway out the door. "Mike and I are meeting the Millers for drinks. The kids had a snack, but they'll need a real dinner by 6. We'll be back late." "Sarah, wait, I have a report to finish." "You're so lucky you don't have kids, Anna. You don't know what real work is," she'd call back, the door slamming behind her. The weekends were worse. Saturday and Sunday became a blur of mac and cheese, sticky fingers, and the Baby Shark song playing on a loop until I wanted to claw my own ears off. My parents, the same people who needed my help, suddenly found plenty of energy to visit distant relatives or go on long drives the moment Sarah and Mike had plans. I was drowning in a sea of other people's responsibilities, and I could feel my own life slipping away. I was tired, I was broke, and I was invisible. Then came the Wednesday that broke the camel's back. My friend Rachel, a girl I'd known since freshman year who actually treated me like a human being, stopped by my desk. "Hey, stranger. You look like you've been run over by a semi-truck. A few of us are heading to Pine Ridge Ski Resort this weekend. Just a quick getaway, Saturday morning to Sunday night. You in?" The word yes left my lips before I could even process the logistics. I needed this. I needed air. I needed a room with a window and a bed that didn't smell like old gym clothes. Friday evening, I was in my tiny room, the adrenaline of escape making me feel lighter than I had in months. I was folding my thickest wool socks when the shadow fell across the doorway. Sarah was leaning against the frame, her arms crossed, her face a mask of annoyance. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Packing," I said, not looking up. "I'm going to Pine Ridge for the weekend with some friends. You need to cancel." I stopped, a pair of leggings in my hand. I looked up, certain I'd misheard her. "Excuse me." "You have to stay here," she said, as if she were explaining the alphabet to a toddler. "Mike and I are going to Aunt Linda's 60th birthday party in Millbury. Mom and Dad are coming too." Aunt Linda said specifically, "No kids. You're watching Emma and Lucas." I felt a strange sensation then. It wasn't anger, it was something colder. It was the feeling of a final thread snapping. I actually laughed. "You're joking, right? You didn't even ask me. You just decided." "We all discussed it," Sarah said, her voice rising in that defensive way it did whenever she was caught being a sociopath. "It's the most logical arrangement. You're already here, and we need this night out." "I am not a logical arrangement, Sarah. I am a person with a life." I turned back to my bag, my heart hammering. "I'm going skiing. Figure out a babysitter." "Mom, Dad," Sarah shrieked, her voice echoing through the house. "You won't believe what she's saying." The thundering of footsteps followed. Within seconds, my tiny room was packed. My mother, my father, Sarah, and Mike, the The 4 people I had been supporting, feeding, and cleaning up after stood there like a firing squad. "What is this I hear about you leaving your sister in the lurch?" my mother demanded. "I'm not leaving her in the lurch, Mom. I'm going on a trip I planned and paid for. Sarah's children are her responsibility." "How can you be so selfish?" my father growled. "After everything we've done for you? We gave you a roof over your head. A roof I pay for." I shouted back, the dam finally breaking. "I pay the bills. I buy the groceries. I sleep in a closet while Sarah and her family take over my life. When was the last time any of you asked me how my job was? When was the last time you thanked me for the hundreds of dollars I put into this house every month?" The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time, it was electric. They looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. To them, I wasn't a provider. I was a fountain that was supposed to flow forever without ever needing to be refilled. "You're being completely irresponsible," Sarah hissed, her eyes darting to Mike for support. "Irresponsible?" I stepped closer to her, my voice low and dangerous. "I've spent every weekend for the last year raising your children while you go out and play, perfect couple. I'm done. I am going skiing tomorrow. And if you need a babysitter, I suggest you find the money to hire one, because I'm officially retired." My mother stepped forward, her face contorted into the ultimate weapon in her arsenal, the disappointed parent. "If you walk out that door tomorrow, Anna, don't you dare think about coming back. We don't want someone this selfish living under our roof." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a mother. I saw a woman who had spent 22 years trying to make me feel small so she could feel big. I saw a woman who would happily sacrifice my future to save my sister's convenience. "Fine," I said, the word feeling like a weight lifting off my chest. "I'll go now." "What?" Sarah stammered. I pulled out my phone and called Rachel. I put it on speaker. "Hey, Rachel, is that spare room still available? Not just for the weekend, but permanently." "Of course. Come over right now." Rachel's voice was a beacon of sanity. I didn't pack everything. I just grabbed what mattered. My laptop, my degrees, my favorite coats, and my documents. They followed me through the house, a chorus of "You'll regret this" and "How could you?" trailing behind me like toxic smoke. As I stood at the front door, my hand on the knob, I turned back one last time. They were all standing in the living room, looking suddenly small. "One more thing," I said, my voice steady. "Since I'm don't bother coming back levels of selfish, I'm also done being the family bank. I'm canceling the utility accounts in my name tonight. You'll have to set up your own tomorrow. I hope the golden child has enough in her savings to keep the lights on." The look of pure, unadulterated panic on my mother's face was the most honest emotion I'd seen from her in years. I walked out, the cool night air hitting my face like a blessing. I got into my car, blocked their numbers before I even put it in reverse, and drove toward a life that finally belonged to me. I spent the weekend on the slopes, the wind whipping past my ears, feeling more alive than I ever had in that yellow-walled house. By Monday, I had signed a lease on a studio apartment with a window that led in the morning sun. Sometimes, the only way to save a family is to leave it. And sometimes, the most selfish thing you can do is realize that you were never meant to be the fuel for someone else's fire. I'm Anna, I'm 22, and for the first time in my life, I'm not anyone's dear, anyone's ATM, or anyone's ghost. I'm just me. And that is more than enough. The first night in my new apartment was loud. Not because of screaming toddlers or the drone of my mother's voice, but because of the silence. It was a thick, ringing quiet that felt heavy in my ears. I sat on the floor of my studio. The only furniture I had was a mattress and a desk, and I waited. I waited for the crushing weight of guilt to pull me under. I waited for the feeling that I had committed some unforgivable sin by leaving my family in the dark. But the guilt never came. Instead, there was a strange, buzzing sense of peace. I woke up on Monday morning and did something I hadn't done in years. I took a long shower. I didn't have to worry about Sarah banging on the door because she needed to wash the kids, and I didn't have to worry about the water bill. It was my water. It was my time. I arrived at Davidson Marketing 30 minutes early, my head clearer than it had been since I walked across the stage at graduation. My boss, Mr. Henderson, noticed immediately. "You look like you actually slept this weekend, Anna. Usually, you look like you've been fighting a war." I did, I told him, a genuine smile tugging at my lips. I finally won it. However, the enemy wasn't going down without a fight. Even though I had blocked their numbers, the digital age has a way of letting the toxicity leak through the cracks. On Tuesday afternoon, while I was deep into a data spreadsheet, my LinkedIn notifications started blowing up. I opened the app to find a long, rambling message from Sarah. She had created a fake professional profile just to reach me. "Anna, you have no idea what you've done. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof because of the stress. The lights went out yesterday because Mike couldn't figure out the account login. How can you sit in your fancy new place knowing your nephews are sitting in the dark? You are a monster. We are family. You need to come home and fix this. Now." I stared at the screen, my heart rate spiking. For a split second, I felt that old, Pavlovian urge to fix it. To call the power company, to apologize, to be the good daughter again. But then I remembered the storage room. I remembered the way Sarah looked at me when she told me to cancel my life for her party. I deleted the message and blocked the account. I didn't fix it. I let them sit in the dark. By Wednesday, the siege moved to my email. My father, who rarely wrote anything longer than a grocery list, sent a formal, cold email with the subject line, "Final warning. Anna, your mother and I are deeply hurt. We understand you wanted independence, but the way you left was cruel. We are your parents. We raised you. You owe us more than this. We have decided that if you pay the outstanding utility balance and apologize to Sarah, we will allow you to come back and move into the larger guest room. Let's end this nonsense before it goes too far." Allow me to come back? To a house I was subsidizing? The sheer delusion was almost impressive. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They weren't asking for a relationship, they were negotiating for their lost income. They didn't miss me, they missed my paycheck. I didn't reply. I printed the email, tucked it into a folder I'd labeled "Why I Left," and went back to work. The real test came on Friday. I was leaving the office, heading toward the parking garage, when I saw a familiar silver SUV idling near the exit. My heart climbed into my throat. It was Mike. He stepped out of the car, looking disheveled and frantic. He didn't look like the smug, entitled brother-in-law who usually ignored me. He looked like a man who was drowning. "Anna, wait. Please," he called out, his voice cracking. I stopped 10 feet away, my keys gripped between my knuckles like a weapon. "What are you doing here, Mike? I told you all to stay away." "Sarah is losing her mind," he whispered, glancing around as if my coworkers might hear him. "The kids are crying because she's so stressed. We can't afford the grocery bill this week, and your dad, he's talking about kicking us out because he can't cover the mortgage without your contribution. You have to talk to them. You have to help." I looked at him, really looked at him. Mike wasn't a bad guy in the traditional sense. He was just weak. He had spent his life leaning on Sarah, who leaned on my parents, who leaned on me. The entire family was a house of cards, and I was the base. "Mike," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You have a job now, right?" "Yeah, but it's not enough. The debt from the bankruptcy." "Then you need to get a second job," I interrupted. "Or Sarah needs to get one. There are 4 adults in that house." 4. And yet, for a year, you all lived off the back of a 22-year-old girl. Does that feel right to you?" He looked down at his shoes, his face flushing a deep, shameful red. "I'm not coming back," I continued. "And I'm not sending money. Every cent I earn is staying with me. Tell Mom and Dad to stop emailing me. Tell Sarah to grow up. If the house goes into foreclosure, that's a choice you all made by refusing to plan. It's not my burden to carry anymore." I turned and walked to my car. As I pulled away, I saw him standing there in the rearview mirror, a small, receding figure. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the little sister. I felt like the only adult in the entire family. That night, I sat in my studio and looked at my bank statement. For the first time, the balance column actually looked like it belonged to a business graduate. I had enough to buy a couch. A real, velvet, emerald green couch that Sarah would never be allowed to sit on, and that Lucas would never get to smear chocolate over. I realized then that they would never change. To them, I would always be the villain of the story because I stopped playing the victim. They would tell the relatives I was crazy or ungrateful. They would play the martyrs until the end of time. And that was okay. Because while they were busy telling stories about me, I was busy living one. I leaned back against the wall of my empty apartment, the silence no longer heavy, but light. I was 22, I was alone, and I was finally, undeniably free. The silence of my new life was broken 3 weeks later by a sound I had hoped I'd never hear again. The heavy, rhythmic pounding of my father's fist against my front door. I hadn't given them my address, but in a small town, a business degree daughter at a top marketing firm isn't hard to track down. I stood in the center of my studio, looking at my beautiful emerald green couch, and for a split second, I felt that old, cold knot of terror tighten in my stomach. But as the pounding continued, the terror didn't turn into submission, it turned into a cold, hard clarity. I opened the door. It wasn't just my father. It was the whole caravan. My mother stood behind him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue in a performance that deserved an Oscar. Sarah stood to the side, looking frayed and exhausted, holding a sleeping Lucas who looked far too heavy for her. Mike stayed back by the stairs, looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "So this is it," my father began, pushing his way past me into the room without an invitation. He looked around the small, sun-drenched space with a sneer. "This is the palace you abandoned your family for? A shoebox with a fancy sofa?" "It's my shoebox, Dad," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "And you weren't invited." "Anna, please," my mother wailed, moving toward me with open arms. I stepped back, and her face crumpled. "We can't do this anymore. The bank sent a notice. We're 2 months behind on the mortgage. Your father's hours were cut, and Sarah and Mike, they're trying, but it's not enough. We need you to come home. We'll even let you have your old room back. We'll move the kids' things tonight." I looked at Sarah. I expected to see a smug grin, but I saw something else: desperation. Real, raw panic. For years, she had been the sun around which we all orbited, but without my gravity holding the system together, she was spinning into the void. "I'm not coming back, Mom," I said. "And I'm not paying the mortgage." "You heartless little girl." Sarah snapped, her voice a harsh whisper so as not to wake the toddler. "You have thousands in the bank. We know what you make at Davidson. You're sitting here on velvet while your nephews might lose their home. How do you sleep at night?" "I sleep incredibly well, actually," I replied, crossing my arms. "Because for the first time in 22 years, I'm not carrying the weight of 4 capable adults on my shoulders. Sarah, you have a college degree. Mike, you have a job. Mom, your back seems fine enough to stand on my landing and scream at me. Dad, you've spent 40 years at that plant. You know how to manage a budget. The problem isn't that you can't pay the bills. The problem is that you've decided it's my job to do it for you. We gave you everything," my father roared, his face turning that shade of purple that used to make me tremble. "We fed you, we clothed you, with thrift store hand-me-downs while you sent Sarah on spring break trips," I interrupted, my voice rising to match his. "I worked 3 jobs to pay for my own food in college. I drove a car with a taped-up bumper while you took out loans for Sarah's wedding. You didn't give me everything, Dad. You gave me the bare minimum required by law, and then you expected me to pay interest on it for the rest of my life. The debt is settled. I don't owe you anything." The room went silent. The air felt thin. My mother stopped crying. The tap simply turned off when she realized the damsel in distress act wasn't working. She looked at me with a coldness I had always sensed but never seen so clearly. "You think you're so smart," she hissed. "But you're going to be very lonely in this little room. When you fail, and you will fail, don't come crawling back to us. We're done with you." "Mom," I said, walking to the door and holding it wide open. "I've been on my own since I was 11 years old. I was just living in your house while I did it. I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being like you." They filed out, one by one. My father didn't look at me. Sarah gave me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Only Mike paused for a second, a flicker of something like regret in his eyes, before Sarah hissed his name and he scurried after her. I watched them walk down the hallway, a fractured, broken unit that had spent decades pretending they were a family, when really, they were just a collection of people using the same girl as a safety net. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned my back against the wood and took a deep, shuddering breath. I expected to feel a sense of triumph, but instead, I felt a profound sense of mourning. I was mourning the parents I wished I'd had. I was mourning the sister who could have been my best friend instead of my warden. I was mourning the girl who had spent so long trying to be good that she forgot how to be happy. But then I looked at my apartment. I looked at the marketing reports on my desk that I had worked on without interruption. I looked at the silence, which didn't feel like a void anymore. It felt like a canvas. 6 months later, I heard through a mutual family friend that my parents had sold the childhood home. They had downsized to a small condo, and Sarah and Mike had been forced to move into a rental they could actually afford. It wasn't the tragedy my mother had predicted, it was just reality. Without a daughter to exploit, they finally had to live within their means. They weren't speaking to me, and for the first time, I realized that their silence was the greatest gift they had ever given me. I spent that Thanksgiving with Rachel and a group of friends. We sat around a mismatched table in her apartment, eating a turkey that was slightly overcooked and laughing until our sides ached. There was no talk of mortgages, no screaming children, and no one asked me to be a deer and serve them. I was just Anna. As I walked home that night, the city air was crisp and cold. I looked up at the windows of the apartment buildings, each one glowing with a different life, a different story. I realized that for the longest time I thought family was a cage you were born into. I thought it was a series of obligations that you had to fulfill to earn the right to exist. But as I stepped into my own warm, quiet studio and turned on the lamp, I knew the truth. Family isn't about blood, and it isn't about who you owe. It's about who sees you. It's about who supports you without expecting a receipt. And most importantly, it's about the person you see when you look in the mirror. I sat down on my emerald green couch and picked up a book. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me I was selfish. I was just living. And in the end, that was the most powerful thing I could ever do. I had written my own ending, and for the first time in my life, it was a happy one.